In 2017, Pierre Gasly made his Formula 1 debut at the Malaysian Grand Prix for Toro Rosso. This was a temporary mid-season move as the team began evaluating its lineup for 2018. It was obvious to many that Gasly was going to be in one of those two seats come next season, because he was a Red Bull Junior and easily the best one on offer at that point in time. Just the year prior, he had claimed the GP2 championship, but there was no space for him at the main team or Toro Rosso. However, with signs due for a mid-season swap and the team calling it quits on Danny Kvyat, it seemed as though the time was now for Pierre Gasly. Winning GP2 in 2016 meant he could not go back for another campaign in 2017. Getting a reserve role at Red Bull was a neat token, but outside of a one-off in Formula E, Gasly needed something to do outside of sitting in a garage with ear coverings every weekend. So Red Bull decided to pull out their oldest trick in the book, the place they send their juniors to tune their racecraft when GP2 or Formula 2 is no longer an option. Pierre Gasly was sent to Super Formula. Now this move, as I just mentioned, is a common one in the Red Bull camp. Dan Ticktum, Yuri Vips, Liam Lawson, even Pato O'Ward during his Red Bull stint competed in Japan's highest single-seater series. 2017 would be Gasly's turn. Driving for Mugen that year, he'd be alongside Naoki Yamamoto. This grid featured many familiar faces that race fans still see now in Big 2025. Names like Felix Rosenqvist, Nick Cassidy, Andre Lotterer. They were all vying for that humongous Drivers' Championship trophy one gets for winning Super Formula. Anyways, you've seen the title of this video, so you know what happens at the end. But how did we get to that ending? Let's start at the start. Round 1, Suzuka. Kazuki Nakajima, remember him? Yeah, he's here now and he scored the first points of the year by bagging the 1 point you get in Super Formula for winning pole. Our protagonist Gasly could only muster up P8 after being the slowest driver in Q3. Teammate Yamamoto was third. Despite some impressive moves, Gasly would finish P10. In Formula 1, that would be points, but not here. Here you need a top 8. Hence he left the first weekend of the season pointless. Round 2 saw Gasly a lowly 13th for the first of 2 races at Okayama. His race was even worse. A damaged front wing would see him lose a lap to replace it, putting him P19 at the checkers. Luckily for him, this round saw half points awarded for both races, meaning race winner Yuki Sekiguchi only scored 5 points as opposed to the usual 10. This means Gasly did not suffer as bad as he would have on a regular weekend. The second race of the weekend saw Gasly qualify an impressive 5th, one he would translate into P7 on race day for his first points of the year. Again, on a regular weekend he'd have scored 2, but half points for 2 races means he only scored 1. Gasly qualified P8 for round 3 at Fuji, and he would narrowly miss out on P4 in the race right at the line, instead having to settle for P5. Round 4 at Motegi saw Gasly 4th on the grid, his best qualifying effort so far. He'd gain a place off the start to get to P3 before eventually getting into P2 behind who better than cult hero Kamui Kobayashi. Kamui seemed destined to win. That was before he came in for his pit stop and proceeded to receive one of the slowest pit stops I've ever seen in my life due to an issue with the right rear. This allowed Gasly to inherit the lead, sail away, and score his very first victory in Super Formula. Not wanting to be remembered for a fluke win, Gasly responded at the next round in Autopolis by putting belt to ass, jumping from 5th to P2 in just the run-up to the first turn before allowing team strategy to get him the lead, one he'd hold off from a hard-charging Felix Rosenqvist to take 2 wins in a row. What started off as a lackluster season now saw Gasly just 5.5 points off championship leader Hiroaki Ishiura with only 3 races left. It was crunch time. A Super Formula championship would definitely confirm a place for Gasly in Red Bull's future, so he locked in. He would qualify P3 at Sportland Sugo, narrowly missing out on pole. He'd leap to P2, which set him up for a race-long duel with Yuki Sekiguchi. Gasly would pit way later, emerging quite a distance behind Yuki but with way fresher tires. He'd run Sekiguchi down and come up just short, finishing a mere 2/10 off the win. But even in a loss he gained. Points leader Ishiura could only manage P6, meaning the gap between he and Gasly was half a point with 1 round left in Suzuka. Now, between the last 2 weekends of the Super Formula season, Gasly would get the same F1 call-up I mentioned at the start of the video. He'd replace Danny Kvyat at Malaysia and finish 14th. He'd replace him for 2 races in a row, and that second race would ironically be the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, the very track that weeks later he'd go to for his Super Formula title showdown. Gasly finished the Japanese Grand Prix in 13th. It's very important to note that with a decision to sack Kvyat pretty much made, Gasly had 2 options in front of him going forward: forfeit his title hopes and race for Toro Rosso at the US Grand Prix, or skip what would be his 3rd ever F1 race to take the fight to Ishiura at Suzuka. Gasly chose the latter, confident that he had what it took to win the Super Formula Championship. The Super Formula finale was set for October 22. Just a couple days earlier, October 11, meteorologists began tracking what they labeled a tropical disturbance. 5 days later, that disturbance became a tropical storm. 2 days after that, October 17, it became a typhoon, one they would name Lan. Typhoon Lan intensified more and more as the days passed and was destined to hit Japan directly. Super Formula would still try and get the show on the road despite this. They could only manage 1 Q1 session before intense rain cancelled the day's proceedings. The very next day, Typhoon Lan made landfall in Japan as the 3rd strongest tropical cyclone the world had ever seen. Many were evacuated, buildings were severely damaged, and 17 persons lost their lives from its passage. Around $2 billion worth of damage had been sustained to Japan. Safe to say, because of this, there was no Super Formula season finale, and Pierre Gasly effectively sacrificed a US Grand Prix for a championship that was already decided by half a point. Hiroaki Ishiura was the 2017 Super Formula champion, the 2nd of his career. As for Gasly, he'd still do the remaining F1 races that year for Toro Rosso and would race for them full-time in 2018, which led to him racing full-time for Red Bull in 2019. Now, we all know how that turned out, but it's safe to say losing this championship did not necessarily affect Gasly negatively in any way. It still would have been cool to see what happened though, because Gasly joined the list of Red Bull drivers who tried and failed to win the Super Formula Championship. The most recent being Liam Lawson in 2023, who came up short in a duel with current F2 driver Ritomo Miyata. Luckily, this list was recently broken by my GOAT Ayumu Iwasa. I called it on Twitter and he delivered. Ayumu Iwasa, Red Bull driver mind you, won the 2025 Super Formula Championship because I do not rep mid. Anyways, on the topic of natural disasters, it would be ludicrous of me not to mention one that hit home, literally. On October 28 this year, Jamaica was hit with the most powerful hurricane ever to make landfall in the country, Hurricane Melissa. As one can imagine, the damage was severe, primarily to the western end of the country. Now, I may have been spared based on where I live, but even my relatives' houses in the west lost roofs, electricity, water, and so on. If you want to help Jamaica rebuild, feel free to donate whatever you can to supportjamaica.gov.jm. Any amount will do, for being real, and if you can't donate, then just feel free to share the link as well. Anyways, my name is Intern, I talk wheel, and thanks for watching.